Hello, I'm Andrew Maris, and I'm here to talk to you about industrialization. Specifically, we'll be talking about the Industrial Revolution in Europe between 1850 and 1914. So let's jump right in. We'll be discussing the changes that European society saw in three distinct forms. We're going to talk about the commercial developments, cultural developments, and finally political developments. So commercially, um, there were a lot more factory jobs. Obviously, with Industrial Revolution, there are more industrial um, jobs. Industrial jobs paid more than farm work, so people's wages are rising. Um, Also, during this time period, because factories are growing, uh, products are now cheaper, and across the board, we see um, wages and standard of living rising. This is contrary to the perception that the Industrial Revolution was a time when people lived in much lower standards of living. In fact, it was a time when things were cheaper and people had more money to spend than before. Cities are growing now. People are moving from the country to the city to work in uh, these jobs in factories. And not only are cities getting bigger, they're getting better. So police forces are being implemented and crime is dropping. Amenities are added like parks and museums. And because the discovery of germs by Louis Pasteur, there's a movement for sanitation to clean up the cities and make them healthier. Um, so now they're safer places to live. Um, Also, because growth in industrialization, there are more corporations. People can now have companies with hundreds of people across the country because of railroads, because of better communication technology. And with the rise of corporations, we'll see the rise of unions. Workers are coming together and demanding higher wages, shorter hours, and better working conditions. So those are the main commercial effects of the Industrial Revolution. Now, to move on to the cultural effects, one of the biggest ones being the development of mass consumption and leisure time. So, because people had better wages than ever before, they're working fewer hours, and because factories were producing products for cheaper than ever before, people now had the money, time, and ability to pay for leisure. So, for example, in the 1880s, there was a popular bicycle fad. Around this time, people started reading sensationalist newspapers. They are now going to see live comedy shows and live music shows. People are going to resort towns for vacation. And one interesting uh, way that the Industrial Revolution worked its way into people's lives was the development of team sports. So, sports like soccer that have multiple players in the field with complex rules developed during the Industrial Revolution and sort of embodied some of the big changes in people's lives, because now people were working together at jobs, competing against other firms, and weaving through this complex world. And so team sports grow, which is why in 1896 the Olympics come back. Now, also during this time period, there was a growth in secularism. People started to put less attention towards religion. In some cases, for example, if you look at scientific advances that start to reflect a lower domination of religion. So, for example, Charles Darwin's Origin of Species in 1859 challenged a lot of religious views at the time, and this showed that science was now no longer afraid of a lot of these religious concerns. And during this time period, there was a lot of growth in science because the greater prosperity meant people could do more science. Physics, for example, is another field that was completely revolutionized. There was the quantum revolution, as is called, completely tore asunder a lot of our notions of how the world worked at the time, and led to this enormous explosion in different fields and routes of exploration in physics. Statistics started to become a lot more common. A famous example is Florence Nightingale, who used statistics to help deliver better treatment to soldiers. In psychology, Freud very famously proposed that our subconscious was controlling our actions. This was kind of a brand new idea. People it challenged some of the conceptions of the time of us being rational actors and not having this deeper subconscious mind affecting our attitudes. There are also new artistic directions at this time. So there are convention breakers who start experimenting with free verse and abstract art. There is romanticism, which values emotion over logic. And then, in contrast to that, a greater emphasis on logic in daily lives in other forms of art. So George Seurat, with his pointillism, very logical painting style, and then Charles Dickens, who wrote about ordinary people as opposed to the rich or the well-connected. Finally, we're going to talk about the political changes around the time period. To start off, there were fewer revolutions. Before this point, in the 1800s, Europe was being rocked by revolutions. But this was between 1850 and 1914 was a very calm time compared to the earlier part of the century. There were, for some of the first times, we're seeing liberal and conservative factions compromising. For example, Otto von Bismarck extended voting rights. And there's also new political ideologies. So nationalism joins a party and comes to the conservative side. And this is the basis and what causes the unification of both Germany and Italy. So before that time, those two countries were made up of squabbling city-states and who couldn't throw their weight around on the international level. But now, because this idea of nationalism that was based on a common language, so German and Italian formed the basis of this national identity that brought all these city-states together under one single government. And the introduction of Germany and Italy to the international picture threw off the balance of power in Europe and set in stage a lot of the rumblings leading up to World War I. We weren't just seeing new governments being added to the scene. The governments themselves were now providing more services. So education, welfare, new ways that the government was using tax money and giving back to the citizens. And because this meant large bureaucracies across Europe were growing. Other political ideologies around this time that came up were Marxism, socialism. Those two would play a big part in how the 20th century unfolded. And then feminism and suffragism also started to take root during this time. Before this time, no one talked about women's rights at all, but this is when women started standing up and speaking out. So those were the main political changes of the Industrial Revolution. So I hope you learned from this video, and I hope to see you and teach you sometime in the future.